Kamen Rider movies, the things that everyone hypes up and then immediately forgets about. That may be an over-exaggeration, but how often are the movies brought up when reminiscing on past series? But have no fear, because I shall be ranking almost every Kamen Rider film. It also serves as a good way to celebrate 50 years. I'll be counting every movie up to Reiwa the First Generation, since I haven't seen 0, 1, or Saber yet, so their respective movies won't be counted. I mean, it wouldn't be fair for me to review a movie without having seen the episodes for them, now would it? Also, to clear up confusion on what counts as a movie, movies are anything that airs in movie theaters, no duh. So I won't be counting any of the TV specials, so no Set Cross or Tokijo vs. Gaim for example. To help break up the large amount of movies, and also save me a lot of editing work, I will be breaking up this series into 4 parts. Part 1 will consist of the very bad movies, Part 2 will consist of the bad movies, Part 3 will cover average movies, and the last part will have movies I consider to be great. Well, I'm expecting to piss off a lot of people. Might as well get into it. With such a large selection to choose from, you may think it would be pretty hard to guess what movie would be at last. But if you've been around the community long enough, you know the reputations that the Taisen films have. And with that, you already have a good idea of what film it's gonna be. And wow, would you look at that, it's Kamen Rider Taisen. Yeah, this film lands at the bottom of this list. To start explaining this mess, let's start by going over the story. The whole plot revolves around this kid named Shu, who has the power to reverse anything. Badon wants to kidnap him and use him to reverse Earth with a world inside the Earth to swap the living and the dead because they're evil. While I'm glad that Badon is being used instead of Shaka for the upteenth time, their plan is just built on plot convenience. Their entire plan is reliant on Shu having his magical power, but they weren't even the reason why Shu gained his power in the first place. So ultimately, it's just sheer coincidence that they found the person they were looking for. Also, it turns out that his father Ren is Kamen Rider 15, and he's working with Badon to kill everyone on Earth because it'll make my son happy. I'll be blunt, the whole Ren and Shu subplot didn't really entice me. It was boring, predictable, and was the cause for most of the logical gaps in this film. Not to mention that the only reason Shu got his power was because I want to reverse the damage I caused with my mother before I died, which is just a stupid reason. There are also some plot holes in this film, but the main reason this film lands at the bottom is because of its treatment of the characters. Kota doesn't do much except learn what it means to be a Kamen Rider, even though he should already know what it means to be one from Wizard's special finale. Shotaro, Tsukasa, and Ryo are just there for fan service, but now we get to the more problematic characters. Takumi in this film feels like he regressed in his character development, now believing he has no purpose in life, when the ending of Vice showed that he now had a purpose to live. Not to mention, Kusaka's retcon death heavily impacting Takumi in this film felt a bit off. Keisuke's introduction scene has him acting like a complete jerk by him taking down an entire police force who were just trying to capture a wanted criminal, which is then followed up on him attacking Takumi once he realizes he's a Heisei Rider. Finally, we get to Takeshi. I hate what they did to him and the rest of the Showa Riders. They turned them into a symbol of spite and callousness. They fight against the Heisei Riders because their feelings for the dead revived Badon and caused everything, which is not only a stupid reason to fight against each other, but also shows how hypocritical they act in this film, since almost every Showa Rider's backstory is rooted in death and tragedy. Sure, them fighting against each other does turn out to be a trick, until it's not, but the plan itself was stupid. They'll all turn each other into lock seeds, don't even ask how that's possible, so when Badon launches their final assault, Gaim will somehow revive them all so they can all fight together? Why didn't you guys just team up from the very beginning? Even the fights were just subpar at best, with the riders seemingly just making up the outcomes. Let me tell you, Kabuto losing against Skyrider is bullshit. In the endings, good lord, did they really have to reteach Kota and Takeshi the power of friendship in the most contrived way possible, even though they should already know this stuff? There's a lot more wrong with this movie I could go on about, but I think I've made my point pretty clear. It doesn't have a good plot, the villains are bland, and the characters are either pointless to the plot or treated with disrespect. The next movie is another Taisen movie. Get used to them. It's Taisen GP. This film is only slightly better than Kamen Rider Taisen, mainly because it doesn't disrespect any of the returning cast to that movie's level. Though, instead of not understanding how to write any of the returning characters, this film doesn't understand any of the lore from previous shows. The entire plot revolves around Kamen Rider Sango somehow being built at the end of the original series and defeating Takeshi and Hayato, resulting in a timeline where Shocker rules to the present day. While I'm sure many of you could point out the war issue in that sentence, I'm going to address story issues after I've talked about the characters in this film. Shinosuke doesn't really do much except for warning that Shocker is actually bad. Who would have thought? Kiriko is the only one who has memories of the old world because plot convenience, and that's it. There's really nothing else to her in this film. While it's cool to see the returning writers, such as Tachibana and Yuto, they really don't do much of anything either. They're essentially just glorified cameos. There are also a bunch of kid characters that this film tries to focus on, but it didn't work out so well. Spoiler, you'll find that most of the films that mainly feature kid characters usually don't rank that high. Finally, we get to the main star of the movie, Kamen Rider Sango, Koichiro. His character was bland and his development was equally as generic. His entire arc was learning to fight for justice, but in the most convoluted way possible. You see, Koichiro only cares about victory because he believes that history justifies the victors, and if he loses, that would mean his act of murdering Ichigo and Nigo was wrong all along. But, after losing against Shinosuke, he learns that losing can actually help people grow, and from there, he decides to fight against Shocker. Can you see why this character doesn't make much sense to me? Speaking of Shocker, they're just there. Not much I can say about them other than their plan is pretty stupid. They want to erase Kamen Riders from history, despite already having conquered the world for over 45 years. Now we get to the plot and, oh boy, there are so many lore misconceptions and bad writing choices. Let's begin with the obvious flaw. Gel Shocker was the villain group at the end of the original series, not Shocker. Shocker was even thoroughly disposed of by Gel Shocker grunts when they first came into the series. Other things include stating Takeshi and Hayato escaped through their own willpower when in reality they escaped due to the help of others. Most of the writers wouldn't have existed to be later brainwashed if Shocker had taken over the world back in the 1970s. Kotaro turned into Black Arek despite his Kingstone being destroyed and being under rubble, which would have blocked the sun from even reviving him. He also somehow has Rideron, despite Rideron only being created when Kotaro built it from the blueprints he got from the Demon World, which he wouldn't have been able to do in this film. Kiriko commits suicide for no reason. Go is somehow against Shocker while also being friends with Shinosuke, who was a devout Shocker follower before the movie even took place. Takumi acts like he's completely apathetic towards everything, which contradicts his original character. Takeshi and Hayato reveals they were alive the entire time, which basically means they did nothing but watch for 45 years as Shocker conquered the entire world. Overall, this movie is just bad. The story has numerous plot holes and overall feels very disjointed. The characters are either bland or, once again, not treated correctly, and Shocker just felt boring and had no impact on the story. While this movie isn't part of the Tyson franchise, it is written by the same writer who penned all of them. Let's Go Kamen Rider has pretty much the exact same issues with Tyson GP. Characters that don't do or have much to them, a villain group that doesn't have that much of a presence, numerous plot holes and lore misconceptions, and an overfocus on kid characters. There is one, and only one reason why this film places above Tyson GP. Seeing Shotaro and Philip back on screen. No joke, that single scene hypes me up more than the entirety of Tyson GP. Regarding the other characters, Eiji doesn't really do much in this film, but I will note that him essentially telling a child to execute his own death sentence because he should save his friend seems very out of character for him. I get the whole shtick with Eiji is to reach out to anyone who you can reach out to, but this just takes that to an insane degree. Ankh doesn't do much either except be the entire reason why the plot starts in the first place, and Kotaro and the Tars are just there to waste time for their comedy. Now, there's one reason that all these characters were pushed to the wayside, so we can over-focus on dumb kid characters. Naoki and Mitsuru are pretty much the central characters of the plot, so if you dislike them, well, tough luck buddy, cause they aren't going anywhere else. And these kids are absolutely atrocious. At least 99% of the movie's problems are directly related to the actions of these kids. Eiji's left powerless for a while at the beginning, because one of the kids stole his metal book. The villains get their hands on a cell metal, which they somehow used to take over the world, because the kids started a ruckus that resulted in cell metals getting left in the past. Teddy's forced to stay in the past, leaving Kotaro defenseless in the present, because one of them decided to stay back in 1971 for no reason. And these kids aren't ever punished for their actions, but in fact rewarded for it, because the only reason the day was saved was because that kid stayed in the past, which led to Takeshi and Hayato being freed from Shocker's brainwashing. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about the plot. Well, when I said this movie had the same issues as Tyson GP, it's mainly because this movie has almost the exact same plot as Tyson GP. Shocker manages to defeat Takeshi and Hayato through some shenanigans happening, resulting in a timeline where Shocker is taken from the world. The Rider shenanigans happen, and then big fight scene at the end with all the Riders coming back. However, this movie's story is even more disjointed than GP's. It feels like the production staff were just making up the movie on the fly, resulting in a movie that has multiple story and lore issues. To list some examples, Inimajin somehow goes into the past by using Mitsuru's most important memory, which is actually a memory from his own future. General Black is somehow part of Shocker, despite being from Geldom. Shocker manages to team up with every other villain group, despite most of them having conflicting interests with Shocker. Shocker somehow finds a mysterious new core metal which can form a greed with only one cell metal needed. Both General Black and Takeshi somehow create a fake cell metal in literal seconds. The Denwan are being completely fine despite exploding not even 5 minutes ago. Takeshi and Hayato somehow defeat the Shocker Greed despite losing it to the last time they fought. Every rider loses to the Great Leader just to make the Tamashi combo look good, and more. However, my biggest issue comes with the reveal that Takeshi and Hayato were only pretending to be brainwashed by Shocker. Sure, they were probably only freed around 1991, when the kid was old enough to free them, but that means they spent at least 20 years furthering Shocker's conquest of the world, all for the sake of waiting for the perfect time to strike back. Yeah, remind me when a Kamen Rider has purposely let evil subjugate, torture, and kill thousands, if not millions of innocents for decades, all for the sake of waiting for their chance to win. This action just goes against what Kamen Riders stand and fight for. And it's not just this film that has this problem with representing what Kamen Riders stand for. Both Kamen Rider Tyson and Tyson GP have this issue to some degree. Though like I said, seeing Shotaro and Philip transforming was cool, and seeing the writers come together to fight in the end was pretty great, but the awesomeness of those scenes were just drowned out by the rest of this garbage film. Now, we're back to the Tyson franchise with Cho Superhero Tyson. Watching this movie felt like getting my life sucked out of me. That's how bad it was. The only reason it doesn't rank lower is because it doesn't disrespect any of the characters in an atrocious way. Still, this film barely felt like a Superhero Tyson film, but rather Kamen Rider Tyson with some Sentai characters. The Sentai cast barely do anything important in this film and just feel like cameos. Hell, only one of the Key Rangers got any focus despite being the concurrent Sentai along X8. The main characters in this film really don't do anything. They just feel like cardboard cutouts of their TV counterparts. The only character I found interesting in this film was Hiro, but his whole arc in this film was tied to the worst part of the film, but I'll get to that when I get there. The villains are once again Shocker, and they want to rule over the world, so we can pretty much ignore them because like the movies before them, they had nothing of interest to the movie. The story is both terrible and empty. There are many elements that seem like the writers just made up on the spot, which really just takes you out of enjoying the film, not to help that most of these elements were connected with the worst character in the film, 8. If you don't care about 8's story, well too bad, because 8 is the central focus of the entire film. To help you see why I hate this character, let me inform you of his entire role in the film. So, 8 was diagnosed with a disease that, I'm not even joking, slowly digitized his entire body. To presumably save himself, he created the game Cho Superhero Tyson and then escaped into its game world. Then, somehow, he manages to bring enemies from games like Xevious and Galaxia into the real world, forcing the heroes to defeat Cho Superhero Tyson in order to save the world. However, it turns out this was all part of 8's plan, because it would unlock the secret stage that would allow Shocker to wreak havoc on reality by reviving them. Why would 8 do this? It's because I forgot to mention that the dude was also born without emotions, and he wants to destroy the world because he doesn't care what happens. Then, through the power of friendship, he learns that what he's doing is actually bad and then decides to live in the real world. Do I need to explain how contrived all these elements sound? And to make matters worse, Hiro's entire arc in this film is connected to this kid. He feels guilty for not saving 8 because it tarnished his perfect record, but then realized that he wasn't in the wrong, 8 was, because 8 refused to be operated on. Hiro doesn't even grow from this, and the audience knows that Hiro wouldn't let this get to him, since we know as a fact that his policy as a doctor is not to operate on someone who doesn't want to be operated on. For as terrible as this movie was, there was one shining moment, the character select sequence. It was great seeing all the actors interact with each other, even if they don't do much later. It's a shame too, since the tournament aspect of the film was genuinely interesting. This film would have been better had they just removed 8's entire story and stuck with the tournament for its central plot. That way the movie wouldn't feel like it's condensing 3 things into one, but alas, we are left with this unfortunate mess. Moving out of the Yonemura movies, we get to the first Inui movie on this list, Kamen Rider the First. If watching Cho Superhero Tyson felt like my soul getting sucked out, watching the first felt like that, but 100 times worse. There was nothing left in me inside after I watched this film. This has got to be one of the slowest and most empty Kamen Rider movies in existence. The plot is very, very bare bones. I won't lie though, the first third of the film was genuinely interesting to watch. mainly because it explored how Takeshi dealt with the consequences of his new powers. However, that all goes down the drain when Inoue decided to employ his favorite trope, adding in love triangles for no good reason. The last 2/3 of this film are dedicated between the love triangle of Takeshi, Hayato, and Asuka. Is this a Kamen Rider reboot film, or a tween drama film? The characters aren't even that entertaining to watch. I already mentioned Takeshi's interesting conundrum, but after that, all we get from him is a bland, goody two-shoes hero. Hayato's made even worse. They took his original character of him being a hot-headed yet amiable guy into a jerk with a heart of gold. Then we get to Asuka. She's just there to fulfill two of Inoue's most famous tropes, being a love interest and causing misunderstandings. Even though the first third of the film was interesting, it was bogged down by the subplot of Asuka thinking that Takeshi killed her boyfriend because Takeshi doesn't even bother to explain what actually happened. It's not until the hour mark for the issue to finally be resolved. Back to the story, there are once again many elements that just feel contrived. Takeshi regains his humanity because water crystal artsy bullshit. Takeshi doesn't need any blood transfusion because he's already a perfect cyborg, despite Hayato being remodeled after Takeshi and suffers from that flaw. And Asuka chooses Takeshi in the end despite knowing her thought to be dead boyfriend is actually still alive. In Shocker, they're just there. Not much else I can say about them. There is one good thing I can attribute to this film. It's the subplot between the sick patients. But even then, it wasted time since it focused on two irrelevant characters instead of developing the two main characters that needed it the most. Despite being a reboot of the first Kamen Rider series, it feels anything but one. I don't have any creative segue here, so I'll just say that it's Superhero Tyson Z. Or Zet if you want to call it like that. This movie had an interesting concept, but man, it executed it disastrously. The whole plot once again felt like it was being made up on the spot, with new elements being added and dropped left and right. We'll create magic portals all over the universe, and we'll eventually create the largest magic portal to teleport some giant castle onto Earth, so that we can use it to spread the Genmu dimension throughout the universe and destroy it. Like, okay, sure, why not? The villains are Space Shocker, so Shocker with some word behind it. Yeah, get used to seeing a bunch of Shocker variants that exist for no other reason than we needed nostalgia to play a factor in selling our movies. However, the characters are the worst part of the film. They're either written so you either don't remember them, don't care about them, or just hate them. The entire Wizard cast barely does anything, Guy's there for humor, and Yoko and Psycholion are just there to evoke emotions in the audience whenever something bad happens, which means it doesn't work. Hell, Psycholion is just a giant plot MacGuffin that ends up feeling unimportant because its entire point was to activate the giant castle thingy to destroy the universe, but when Psycholion's removed, the castle still works for some reason, so what was even the point of him? Finally, we get to Geki and Retsu. Geki was decent as a character, but the dude was hot-headed and an idiot. Like, yeah, tell the two people who can transform to stay behind while he investigates the enemy base alone without any powers. Retsu, what did they even do to him? They legit just turned him into the secondary villain in this film. I'm not even joking. At the start of the film, he immediately suspects Haruto and Nito for causing the portals to be opened across the universe because they are magic users, and has no other proof besides that. He also genuinely believes that killing them is the best course of action, and even revokes Geki's ability to transform when he refuses to kill both of them. And then later in the film, he just decides to blow up Earth because there's no other option. Like, holy shit. Is this really what Retsu was like back in Space Sheriff Gaban? For as much as I dislike this movie, it does rank higher than everything else, mainly because there were more interactions between the three series that I enjoyed. However, that's its only positive. I want to make it clear, I really wanted to like this film, but I couldn't. Heisei Generations Forever is, in my opinion, the film with the worst plot out of every single Kamen Rider film. Character-wise, Sento and Soko barely get any focus. Sure, Soko has this moment of existentialism, but that doesn't even last for a minute before he goes back to the bland hero he is. Everyone else felt unimportant because all the screen time went to two kid characters. Yeah, it's nice that they basically represent us fans, but my issues is that they're tied to some of the more incomprehensible parts of the film for me. Tid is a terrible villain. He wants to destroy the Heisei era because it's the last Heisei movie and we need some villain to tie into that. His personality is non-existent and his whole plan is just filled with issues. Finally, we get to the plot. Good lord. This movie made me want to bash my head in with how confusing, incomprehensible, and annoying this writing was. Nothing in this film makes sense if you actually put some thought into it. Okay,
So the whole thing of this film is that Kamen Riders are actually a work of fiction, and this kid, Ataru, is the cause of bringing Kamen Rider characters into reality. The issue is that he does this using an Imagine, and besides the fact that I don't think Imagine have the power to literally manipulate universes, this contradicts the statement that Kamen Riders aren't real, since both the Imagine and Tid originate in reality, despite both of them hailing from Kamen Rider series, Den-O and Geo respectively. To put shortly, there is no clarification on whether Kamen Riders were always fiction or part of reality, which is an issue when that's the main focus of the film. Tid's entire plan revolved around becoming another Kuga, which would somehow erase Kamen Riders from history or reality, even though they weren't part of reality because they were just a TV show. Unless Tid becoming another Kuga made Kamen Riders nothing more than a fictional TV show. But Shingo states that Kamen Rider Kuga was going to air on January 30th, implying that it was always going to be a TV show? Does this mean that Tid was just trying to erase the TV franchise from existing? But Riku exists in reality, so does that mean Kamen Rider was going to be like a reality TV show? Great, now my head's spinning. Oh yeah, not to mention the other unexplained details, such as why Shingo was so important to Tid's plan. Yeah, at first it's implied that he can somehow activate Tid's giant tower that he somehow has, but then it turns out that he's important because he comes from an era where Heisei Riders don't exist yet, and combining with Tid somehow makes another Kuga more powerful. Also, how in the world did Ataru not even notice that Shingo looked like his older brother from the picture in his own house? We also get the marvelous scene of the Kamen Riders coming into reality because people remember them, even though Shingo knows they exist and has remembered them his entire life. So why are they only now appearing in reality? Because Shingo acknowledges that they're real now, despite having known them? God, this film just infuriates me like nothing else. Sure, I should have probably just turned my brain off and enjoyed the film, but I'm unfortunately not like that. The only reasons why this movie doesn't rank any lower is because I genuinely like the mystery in the opening section, and seeing Takeru Sato come back as Ryotaro was nice. Still, this was a terrible movie to celebrate ending the Heisei era of Kamen Rider. On the topic of Den-O, our first Den-O movie is up next. Yes, the series that has the most movies out of any series, 8 movies. For reference, Gaim had 7, but 4 of them were only 30 minutes. Den-O has 8 one-hour movies, which is very impressive. Now, Onigaishima Warship is the worst Den-O movie, mainly for how many elements it pulls from previous Den-O movies, and using them very poorly. There are 2 demons that need to complete the MacGuffin of the movie, the Kirifuda, in order to unlock the Onigaishima Warship to take over the world. The liner crew find out about the plan, some time travel shenanigans happen, and then they stop it. That may sound like a massive simplification, but honestly, that's all the plot there is to this movie. Ryotaro and the Taros don't really do much unless you want to say padding the movie with comedy counts, but I don't. Despite being the second film to feature Kotaro, he does nothing as well. The villains are probably the worst Den-O movie villains out there. I'd wager that even if you watch this film, you don't even remember their names or who they are. They're demons that come from the past and they want to rule the world. That's all we get for them. Finally, we get to Yu, who is the movie's exclusive character. He's a young brat that has had a tragic life up to this point and wants to escape into the past to avoid it. However, the film immediately drops that entire character point for him and instead turns him into a goody two-shoes with a heart of gold. It's only at the end where they bring that original character point to make it seem that Yu developed. Also, the big twist? It's that he's Sakurai Yuto's younger self, which adds nothing to Yuto's character. The storytelling just feels like the writer gave up writing Den-O movies and just added stuff into it to see what works. At the beginning of the film, Yuto has mysteriously vanished from time and the Taros are scattered throughout time for some reason. Then the movie ignores that entire plot point for the rest of the movie. I'm not even joking, it's never even explained what caused those things in the first place. Additionally, this movie has the dumbest scene I've ever seen in Kamen Rider. They somehow trick the villains into believing they have traveled through time using nothing but drawings and fake props that they somehow all got and set up in a couple of minutes. I get that it's supposed to be comedic, but this is comedy at the expense of making everyone look dumb. Not to mention that this scene is very dragged out. There are also other storytelling issues I have, but to summarize, Onigaishima Warship just feels soulless. There's very little to the characters, villains, and movie plot. It tries to focus on the comedy instead of the story, which just results in the interesting plot points and possible expansions on characters getting pushed to the wayside. Also, the team-up with Decade was minimal and pointless at best. Speaking of Den-O and Decade team-ups, our next film is episode Yo of the Cho Den-O trilogy. I apologize for repeating myself, but this film is just terrible. It's another plot with time travel, but at least it tries to be interesting. The plot revolves around Daiki trying to interfere with an event that his past self was involved in, but then the shenanigans with the Weiner crew dilute this simplistic plot until the movie becomes irritating and annoying. As you can probably tell from my tone, Ryotaro and the Taros don't add to this film at all and actually hinder it in my opinion. Daiki is an interesting case. While he does retain that cockiness of his, I feel like he's oddly nicer and kinder than he usually is for some reason. I mean, he can be a nice guy at times, but mostly he's just a dick to others. How come in this film he wants to help someone completely unrelated to him? Sure, it's because this treasure may not be important to me, but it's important to somebody else, but that just sounds out of character for what we know of Daiki. Reiji is the movie's exclusive villain. He hates humans, and then he doesn't. That's his entire character and arc. Eve is even worse. It's an AI that goes crazy at the end of the film because we need a villain to be defeated at the end of the film. The storytelling is awful. I've already mentioned how padded this film is with pointless scenes for comedy, but they introduce a bunch of things out of left field, namely the Time Police, an organization we've never heard before or since this movie. There's also the issue of Daiki's motivation throughout the film. Sure, he wanted to help Reiji, but the film also presents him as him wanting to steal the Den Rider to steal time. It's like the writer couldn't think of a good way to hide Daiki's true motivation, so they just made him flip-flop between them, which doesn't help when you look at his actions throughout the film. There's also the fact that Daiki, out of nowhere, gets handed the DNK touch by Reiji. Is it ever explained why the Time Police had this? No. Still, for as much as this movie lacked, it is saved by Daiki being a badass at the end of the film, but that's the only reason it ranks this high.
Now we get to the next film. Get it? The next? As in Kamen Rider the next? Haha, I'm so funny. I didn't like this movie. Now, take the first, but replace all the love triangle related stuff with horror, and that's essentially this movie. It only ranks higher because I found the horror more interesting than a love plot, but this film is still extremely slow, with underdeveloped characters and villains. First of all, both Takeshi and Hayato seemingly regressed in their complexity from the first. Takeshi is now more meek than ever, and also seems to no longer be seeing Asuka, since she is not even mentioned once in this film. So great, the entire love triangle from the first film we spent nearly over an hour on is now completely pointless. Hayato is now a playboy, and that's it. He also dies at the end, but who cares? His entire character is wasted in this film. You'd think that Shiro Kazumi would play a pretty important role in this film, but he doesn't even do much until the final act of this film. Also, despite being a reboot version of B3 Shiro, this version has even less personality than his Showa counterpart. All he cares about in this film is his sister and power. Shocker plays even less of a role in this film than in the first. Their plan is to turn everyone into cyborgs by injecting people with nanomachines, and they think this will somehow convince everyone to join Shocker? Yeah, I think they have a couple screws loose. But Showa Shocker has had some dumb plans before, so I guess that excuses it somewhat. Now, there's a reason why these important characters got so little screen time. It's because all of their screen time got pushed to the wayside to focus on a horror plot. Well, it wasn't bad, it just felt out of place for a Kamen Rider film, and essentially forced the big bad scary monster to be the final villain of the film, just to give a satisfying resolution to the horror plot. Speaking of resolution, the final act of this film was terribly organized, with a constant flip-flop of scenes between the horror plot and the Shocker plot. There are also some dumb storytelling choices, such as Shiro suddenly deciding to fight against Shocker because he thinks it's what his sister would want, and Takeshi getting another love interest for no reason. Still though, if you do like horror, I would say this film is just okay. However, this film feels like it's a Kamen Rider film in name only.
Now, it's time for the first Showa movie entry on this list. Five Riders vs. King Dark sounds like it would be interesting, but well, this film lies. They don't fight King Dark in this film at all. Aside from lying to the viewers, there is no substance to the plot whatsoever. Keisuke finds out about an evil plot, we jump cut from random fight scenes with the other Showa Riders, they all team up at the end, and then they win. I know I sound nitpicky because it is a Showa film, so I can't expect too much from this film, but I still feel like other Showa films had good elements to them, as you'll see later on. This film felt rushed and wasted many opportunities. For example, despite being the first instance we see of Rider-Man after his supposed death, we don't even get dialogue between Shiro and Joji that shows that Shiro's surprised that Joji's still alive. This film is just a massive disappointment for what could have been one of the first big team-up movies for Kamen Rider. Returning back to the Den-O train, Up next is Final Countdown.
時間の波を捕まえて
This film just feels bare bones. The characters, villains, and plot are all there, but they feel like they're just lacking something. Despite being the film to introduce Kotaro, I feel like I barely knew anything about his character by the end of this movie. He's introduced as a cocky brat, and then after getting knocked down a peg, he trains and then becomes a normal protagonist. I will say that his character could have been interesting, but this film just wasted it. The other characters don't do much either. The Taros are the central focus of the film, since Ryota pretty much spends the entire movie possessed by the villains. All they do is comedic stuff, not really doing much else until the end of the film. Oh yeah, Yuto is here. I forgot he even existed in this film because he literally does nothing. Shiro is the main villain of this film, and his goal is to resurrect his dead girlfriend by killing Ryoto's ancestors, which will cause Ryoto to cease to exist, which will cause a time distortion so great that it will make all the dead living again and all the living dead? Yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong, however, but isn't the whole point of a singularity point that they aren't affected by any changes in time, even if their past is messed around? Wouldn't this plan just not work? Shiro also has no personality whatsoever, being a regular brute that barely emotes. The only thing he ever cares about is his dead girlfriend, so he's basically just a sim. Finally, the story. I've already mentioned how stupid Shiro's plan was, but the rest of the story is just non-existent, filled with needless padding. Take away all the fluff and what really happens in this film. Ryotaro has been possessed by Shiro's forces, so the Taros go back in time to stop Shiro and save Ryotaro. After a big fight filled with emotional speeches, Ryotaro is saved and Shiro is stopped. Roll credits. Additionally, the final fight scene drags on for way too long in my opinion. Sure, it's mainly filled with Momotaro's making a speech about how much Ryotaro means to him, but I feel like that was already something that was done in Deno's finale, which was already copied from the episode where Climax Form was gained. So doing this whole symbolizing of Ryotaro and the Taros' bond felt a bit repetitive. Overall, this movie felt like it was trying to cover up how bare bones it was with a bunch of other things that tried to distract the viewer. The characters really don't have anything important added to them. Shiro is probably one of the worst movie villains, and the plot is just empty. If there is one good thing about this film, is that while I did find the speech Momotaro gave was a bit repetitive, I still liked it. V3 vs. Destron Mutants is like a padded show episode. There's really not much plot, and there are some inconsistencies within it, but my main issue is with how repetitive it is. The entire movie is basically just 3 scavenger hunts that last for a total of 30 minutes, so yeah, not the best use of time. However, the biggest reason it falls so far is also tied to the best thing about this movie. While it's cool to see Shiro fight with Takeshi and Hayato, it doesn't really gel with the series' continuity. Shiro doesn't even react to them being alive and well, which conflicts with later episodes where Shiro's shocked to see they're still alive. Still, I can't knock this movie too hard, but man, it's pretty repetitive. Another Showa movie, and this time it's Kamen Rider X the movie. I mean, yes, this is just a regular episode, but it was rebroadcasted on the large screen, so it does count. The only things I dislike is how much it plays into Showa tropes. Keisuke learns the plan because the monster of the week said it out loud for a dumb reason. A child is being used as a hostage, and everyone thinks Keisuke's dead because he fell into a river, which happens twice in this film. So yeah, while I am disappointed in this film, once again, I can't really criticize these movies since they're just products of their time. Still though, at least it doesn't interfere with the continuity of X like V3 vs. Destron Mutants did with V3, so that's positive. Now jumping forward a couple of decades, we get to Kamen Rider Ghost: The 100 Icons. We go from disappointing and repetitive plots to probably one of the most confusing and underdeveloped plots in the franchise. There are a lot of mysteries that never get properly expanded on, causing the world building and story just feeling underdeveloped. To give a list of examples, what exactly is the Icon Island? Who created it? How come its only residents are luminaries? Why did it disappear when Argos died? Why did Senin give a ghost driver to Argos? Why did Senin teleport both Argos and Daigo to the Icon Island? How come Senin didn't use the luminaries from the Icon world to make the wish to the Great Eye himself? How come all the Icons that entered the Icon world gained human forms and also lost their memories? How come everyone in that village was an Icon despite the fact that Icons aren't part of spirits but rather an invention of Leganma? Was Daigo really helping Argos for over a decade? And for what? How come Senin didn't even try and fight against Argos? Etc, etc. Though my issues with the story come at the very tail end of this movie. For some reason, this film introduces the concept that if Takeru's body is destroyed, Takeru cannot exist as a ghost. Despite the fact we saw his body dissolve in episode 1. Sure, you may bring up that if a Ganma's host body is destroyed, then the Ganma dies as well, but the hosts aren't dead, they're just merely in stasis. Takeru's different, he's already dead. Later on, Takeru then manages to convince all the luminaries to break free from Argos by reminding them of dinner, which is pretty stupid. Then, when the film needed the obligatory revive Takeru stunt, he comes back because of magical spirit power, even though by the film's own logic, Takeru still doesn't have a body, so he shouldn't even come back. Speaking of Takeru, what was his entire character arc in this film? That he's sad because he can't have dinner, even though he can do everything else like a normal human such as sleeping, emoting, and feeling? Yeah, they tried to expand on him, but let's just say that was a major flop. It was a dumb idea to focus on dinner as a major theme of this film, since it's the sole reason why Takeru goes against Argos' plan to turn everyone into ghosts. Speaking of Argos, he's boring as hell. He's Adonis' oldest son, and that's it. He wants to turn everyone into ghosts because he's evil, yada yada. Though, controversial opinion warning, I think that Argos' plan to turn everyone into a ghost wasn't actually that bad of a plan, until he tried to sacrifice 101 wives to achieve it. I mean, think about it. Sure, you wouldn't be able to eat, but that would just mean you don't have to worry about dying of starvation or thirst. You also have the ability to fly, turn invisible, live forever, and a bunch of other perks. Plus, you still have all the aspects of a human, you just can't eat. I'm not saying that Argos forcefully turning everyone into a ghost is a good thing, but when Takeru's only reasoning as to why Argos' plan is evil is because it's wrong to prevent people from eating dinner, you're gonna have to convince me a bit more to fully put me on Takeru's side. Now, the other characters don't really get much focus either. Awan barely does anything, Necrom Trio just felt like a waste of time, and all Makoto really did was find out why his father abandoned him, which didn't even matter since Makoto understanding Daigo barely impacted his character at all. This movie is just a dumb film with a lot of trash. Stupid character development, terrible villains, and just a garbage plot. However, there are some small pieces of good stuff. Even if it was terrible, I respect the effort to try and expand Takeru in a new direction, rather than repeating stuff that was already shown. And that final rider kick is so beautiful. It is probably one of my most favorite movie finishers. Unfortunately, those aspects aren't enough to save this film. Well, now it's time to jump back on the Den-O train again, cause up next is Climax Deca. Seems that Den-O movies just can't get a break, huh? Well, just like Onigashima Warship, this movie lies about its team-up. The Kiva cast barely show up in the film, only relegated to a cameo and a fight scene together. Now, besides the big fat lie, this movie just feels like a watered-down episode of Den-O. All the characters really feel like they're just hollow shells of their TV counterparts. Ryoto was your typical Mikiro, Yuta was the grumpy guy, and the Taros were funny. It makes all the scenes we spend with them feel charmless. The plot of this movie is also completely wacky, which is both the good and bad thing. While I wasn't totally against the whole detective agency thing, I feel like it was pointless in the grand scheme of things, since this movie doesn't really convey the whole detective vibe as well as, say, Double for example. I feel like the movie is just doing it for style, not substance. There are also some unexplained plot holes when trying to tie this film to the TV series, such as Yuto somehow having more Zeronis cards after running out in the finale, and more Emojins somehow appearing despite Kai's death getting rid of all the Emojins, except for the Taros. At least the story was consistent, plus the pacing was fine for the first half of the film. Then the film throws that all out the window by having a 30-minute fight scene that does absolutely nothing to raise the enjoyability of this film. Finally, we get to Negataros. He would probably be one of the more forgettable villains if he didn't have the ability to transform. Somehow. All he wants is world domination and his personality is just being a cocky jerk, so there's really not much to love about this dude. However, even if everything else just felt like a bare-bones episode of Den-O, the subplot with the movie-exclusive side character, Kazuya, was pretty good. His development from a timid and weak-willed cop to a courageous one was nice, even if it still felt pointless in the end. That subplot was the only charming thing about this movie. Everything else, yeah, no. Well, the last entry for part 1 is probably going to be very controversial. It's Kamen Rider ZO. I know, the fight scenes are amazing and the choreography and creativity for them are epic, but everything else is just bland. Masaru is probably the blandest rider protag in the entire franchise. The film doesn't even bother to state his actual name, only giving it in a document that shows up for a couple of seconds in the film. He acts as a stoic yet helpful person, and that's it. So pretty much like most of the writers before him. Sure, we learned that he was an assistant to the professor that turns him into a Kamen Rider, but that's all we know of his backstory. The dude barely even emotes in this film. The villain, the Neo-Organism, or the Neonoid, or the Neo-Lifeform, whatever, is not a good villain in my opinion. Yeah, both its and Doros' appearances are cool, but like everything else in the film, there's not much else other than aesthetics. The Neo-Organism is just an insane brat that wants to genocide humanity because scientific creation becomes more powerful than its creator and tries to become God. Hell, why did Professor Mochizuki even create it in the first place? Just because he can? Speaking of the professor himself, the whole "he was actually a good guy the entire time" felt like a cop-out, given the fact that despite being the one who turned Masaru into Zeto, he didn't even bother telling Masaru that he needs to become Zeto to stop the Neo-Organism, and instead forcibly experimented on him without even explaining anything. You know, you'd think you would at least want to get his consent before irreversibly changing his life forever. Now we get to the plot and it's just a dumpster fire. The film rarely slows down to actually explain what's even going on or explore any of our main characters. It even opens up with a fight scene. It's not until the halfway point when we finally learn what's even happening. How are the viewers supposed to care about the stakes when the film doesn't even bother explaining what they are? Besides the god-awful pacing, there are a bunch of contrivances, coincidences, and things coming out of nowhere to force the story to move along or to justify something that shouldn't even make sense. It's like the scenes regarding plot are only there to set up the next fight scene instead of actually focusing on the plot. Now, the reason why this is the best of the worst are the awesome fight scenes, monster designs, and the kick-ass ending song. But everything else about this film is just a mess. It's like the film is trying to be an action reel rather than a proper movie with interesting characters, relationships, and villains.